Hello my friends, and a very warm welcome back to my painting channel. And in this video I'm going to be painting not one, not two, but three of the Birkin family from the Resident Evil 2 board game. We're going to paint all three of them simultaneously. We're going to paint them at the same time, and I'm going to have a lot of little snippets and clips and things as I'm painting the three of them together. And hopefully this is going to make for a really cool little video. And at the end I'm also going to show you a really unique way of painting a lab style base as well, so stay tuned. What we're going to do first, we're going to start with my tried and tested skin paint, and we're going to use the beige red. Now if you've seen my skin painting tutorial, you'll know how to do this, and you should be kind of an expert at this by now. So as I said, I'm going to include a few little snippets and clips just up in the corner as I paint the three of them simultaneously, and this will allow us to switch between and show you me painting all of them sort of together and things like that. This is going to be a really cool and unique and great little way of me painting all of them, but without taking up too much of your time. So yeah, we're just going to base all of the skin using this colour, and then once we've done with that, we're just going to focus on the blue parts of Sherry first. So we're going to use a medium blue, and we're going to paint the shorts, and we're also going to paint the scarf area of the uniform just up the top as well. I'm going to try to be careful with this so that we don't get any of this paint on the skin that we've already painted, and this colour is going to be a really great middle of the road sort of blue that will allow us to build up a little bit later and get us a little bit more vibrancy through this colour as well. These little models are really great. These little characters are fantastic. So painting these in the classic style, so painting them to look like the classic video game characters, is always really fun and nostalgic for me. But it's also great because you get to see the characters really grow and come to life. From there then we're going to use a German grey, and we're going to paint this on both the trousers and the shirt for Annette. So I'm just going to try to be careful just to cover all of those areas, but without getting these colours on the skin that we've already painted. Now why we're doing it this way and why I'm painting them in this way is purely just because if I painted the lab coats and the whites and things like that first, it might be difficult then to get the paint into some of the more difficult to reach cracks and creases and things like that. So it's always easier to paint the inside colours and work your way out. By doing so then it makes it a little bit easier for you to paint them through. From there then I'm going to use one of my favourite colours, and I'm going to use dark rust. This one I'm just going to put on Annette's shoes and also Sherry's shoes, and I'm also going to paint the leather belt straps. So we're going to paint this on both William and Annette's belts, just like so. Again, being careful with this one because the belts are particularly small and quite thin, so just trying not to get the paint on some of the other colours. There then I'm going to use Stonewall Grey, and I'm going to use this on William, and I'm going to use this on the inner shirt of William as well. So like I was saying with the whites and the lab coats, we want the lab coats to be quite bright and vibrant and stand out a little bit. So by using this Stonewall Grey, this is a really great middle of the road grey. So this is going to allow a really nice sort of transitional difference between the shirt underneath and the lab coat on top. And then for his suit trousers, we're going to use a sombre grey. So this is a nice pastel blue-grey colour. This is a really nice colour for this particular model. Again, like I say, I'm painting these a lot more like the traditional classic characters. So I've looked at a lot of reference photos and a lot of reference pictures from the original video games. So I'm not painting these up like the new age ones. We're painting these up to be a lot more like the originals. And in those originals, they have a very limited sort of muted down palette. So this is what we're trying to achieve by doing this as well. For William's shoes, I'm painting those a little bit different, and I'm going to paint those using the leather brown colour because again in the original game he has these much brighter shoes, so we're going to use the leather brown to just make those a little bit different. And from there we're going to use Ghost Grey. So this is a technique that I've used to paint white quite often. So if you've seen me painting white before, you'll know kind of how I do this. Pretty much what we're going to do is we're going to base using Ghost Grey first, because this will allow us to tone up to white in a really nice even and equal transition. This means that the whites then will pop and they will look really vibrant, but it will also give us the option of toning down into those creases and allowing a really nice smooth transition into white that's pleasing on the eye. As I normally say, it's very difficult to paint white, then tone it down, then paint white again, because if you paint straight white, it's hard to find a highlight to that. So by painting a nice light grey colour like this Ghost Grey, it gives you the perfect opportunity to build that vibrance and build that colour back up. From there then we're going to move on to a khaki, and with khaki I'm just going to use this as a base colour for the hair. Now if you want you can paint all of your models using different hair colours. I know that they've got sort of a subtle hint of brown and a little bit of a blondie kind of colour, so I'm going to paint all three of them the same just for this video, and I will have coming soon as well, because someone did recommend in the comment section that I do a video on how I paint all different kinds of hair. So I have got a video that I'm working on currently of how to paint loads and loads of different hair colours, so stay tuned and I will be unveiling that one hopefully very, very soon. Now for the red parts, I'm just going to base this using a dirty red. So this is an AK Interactive paint. As you'll notice, I've used a lot of Vallejo paints to do this, and I'm just switching over now to using this AK Interactive paint. And as you can see, I'm just painting William's tie, but I'm also painting Sherry's headband as well. And I'm also going to paint the name badge for Annette using the same sort of thing. So there's a little bit of red just across the name badge that I'm also covering using the same thing. Now try to be careful with the tie because it is quite small, so just try to use the very tip of the brush and just pick out that area as well. So I'm also then going to switch across to gunmetal, which is a great dark silver colour. This is a true metallic colour, and I'm going to paint this just on Sherry's little her little pendant, and I'm also just going to gently, carefully paint a little bit across the belt buckles as well for both Annette and William at the same time, just like so, just to be as quick and as careful and as easy as possible. Now once that bit is done, we're going to use a Retributor armor, which is another favourite colour of mine, and there's a small gold motif just on Sherry's uniform, just across behind her hands. So I'm just going to be careful just to pick out that area. And then I'm moving on to a tenebrous grey. Now if you don't have tenebrous grey, you can just use Vallejo black. The matte black is perfect for this. Tenebrous grey, the reason why I use this is it is very fluid. This moves off your brush onto the miniature very quickly and easily, and that's why it's one of my favourites. And that's all I'm going to do with this, is just paint both Annette's and William's guns using this colour just as a nice base tone and as a nice base colour that we can sort of add a little bit texture to later. Now once all of the base coats are done, we're going to move on to the wash area, and doing the washes, we're going to use a flesh wash from the Army Painter. So I'm using the flesh wash just across all of the skin area, and again I'm going to try and show you this on all three of them at the same time. So using Sherry in the middle, and I'm just popping a little bit of the flesh wash across both Annette and William as well, as you can see. Just trying to cover all of those areas where the skin is, but we're trying not to get this on any of the whites and things like that. So for the main bulk of the shade then, I'm just going to use a Nuln oil. Now what I've done with the Nuln oil, just to allow it to move a little bit better and to manipulate this a little bit better on the miniature, I've added a little bit of water to this so that this then becomes a little bit thinner, a little bit more fluid. It means that I can manipulate it better, but it also means that because it's that little bit thinner, it's not darkening the model down too much. This means that what we're going to get is a nice subtle shade just in the creases and in all of those folds, but without it dictating and taking away from the colour of the model. So as I say, we're not toning the model down too much, we're not darkening the model down too much. Instead, we just pop in the shade just into those creases. So especially on the lab coats and the white that we're going to paint, this is really going to allow those shadows to be quite nice and subtle without overtaking that colour, because we want these whites to sort of stand out. We don't want these whites to turn down into blacks and dark greys. We really want them to pop. And then again, as I said, if you've watched me paint skin before, you'll know how we're doing this. We're going back to the base colour, so we're going back to the beige red, and we're now just going to slowly build this colour back up. And again, I'm just going to pop the little videos up in the corner as well, so that you can see me painting the three of them simultaneously. This will give you an idea as to how I'm painting the skin and how this is coming along. Skin is one of those really rewarding areas of a model where you can get really good results nice and easily like this, or if you wanted to, you can spend a lot more time and really work on those layers and get some really great blends and some really nice sort of blended through skin layers. It can be both easy and it can be both complicated, but you can get some really great results. It's a really rewarding part of the miniature to paint this skin, because once you see it pop, even if you've painted it easily and you see that skin tone start to pop, it really is rewarding. It's a really nice feeling, because skin can be one of those daunting parts of the miniature. Like I said, if you wanted to see how I paint loads of different skin tones, my previous video on how I was painting skin is a perfect place to start, because I do go a lot more into detail than in this video on painting the skin. So once we've done the beige red, we're just going to mix half and half, so one blob of beige red with one blob of basic skin tone, and we're going to do the exact same thing. We're just going to build this up now in the lighter areas. So as you can see, I'm just picking out the nose, the cheekbones, the forehead, and things like that. Now I'm not going to go too much into detail with the skin, because as I said, my previous video is based entirely on helping you and showing you sort of how I paint the skin and going into detail with that. But we're going to try to pick out all of the lighter areas, like I said, the nose, the chin, the cheekbones, across the fingers here as well, just kind of dictating where the light source would be when we paint in this. Again, like I say, these models are particularly small, so just try to use the very tip of your brush. For these models and for my detailed work, I do use a size 0 brush. I tend to use a lot of synthetic brushes as well. I find that the very sort of tip of the brush is very, very fine, and it allows me to get some really great little details out of the models while I'm painting as well. So yeah, so like I say, just being careful now not to get the skin on any of the areas of the normal colour that we've painted, and just covering all of those highlights. Now once that part is done, we're going to move on to use the medium blue again, and we're just going to start to pick out the lighting on the shorts. Just like we've done with the skin, we're just going to allow that shade, that null Nile, where it's sat, just in all of those little creases and all of those little folds, so that then gives us that semblance of depth and shade. So you can see where the shade is sat into those creases, and using the tip of the brush, we're just picking out all of those little details. You can see the way that the clothing and the folds and things are just going around the model. So as I've said in the past, this is a little bit like painting by numbers, and what that means is you've got your shade there and it's already in the creases. So by picking out the highlighted areas and the raised areas, you kind of got sort of a pattern and a plan as to how you're painting already there, because the raised areas are there for you, the shade is sat in the recess points for you, so this allows you to build up in an easier fashion. Now what I'm doing to that medium blue then, I'm going to just add a half and half, so again just one blob of each, and I'm going to pop an Andrea blue into this as well, and this is a really nice light blue, and by popping half and half, this is a nice even natural step up into the color. So as you can see, we are painting a nice highlight, but without it completely taking over the model and being too sort of garish and over the top. Instead, this is giving us a really nice subtle color that again is going to be pleasing on the eye. It's going to allow you to see this blue and really see those sort of highlighted points, and really allow certain folds and creases to stand out and show off just how sort of detailed and nice that you've painted this model. So you do the same just across the scarf, as you can see, just picking out some of the folds and some of the creases just across the top, making this as simple as possible, as easy as possible, just to kind of get all of those details and all of that colour. Now if you wanted to, you could always just use the Andrea blue and go up further, but I'm not for this video. Now we're going to move on and we're going to paint Annette, and for this one we're going to use the German grey and the pale blue grey, or pale grey blue. But what we're going to do is we're going to use two blobs of the German grey, so we're going to use 2 parts of the darker colour and only 1 part of the lighter colour. And the reason for that is the pale blue grey can take over that colour, and it can make the German grey too light, and we don't want to do that just yet. So what we're doing is we're using the German grey base that we used with the wash in there as the base tone, as the dark colour, and by adding just that 1 blob, that 1:2 ratio of that light sort of blue-grey, this is going to allow a nice natural build-up. And as you can see, that's all I'm doing is exactly the same thing as we did with the shorts. We're just following the creases. So we're following the lines, we're following the way that the model and the creases and the folds in the clothes are. And we're just building that subtle colour up. Now once you've done the 2:1 ratio parts, then we're going to do a 1:1 ratio. So this time we're just using one blob of the German grey and one blob of the pale blue grey. And this then is going to give you a natural transition into that lighter colour. So if you don't do the 2:1 ratio first and you go straight to the 1:1 ratio, that could be a little bit too extreme, so it might stand off the miniature too much and it might not be as subtle when you're looking at it. Especially when you're using darker greys, it's always good to go up in those slightly lighter increments instead of going straight up into a really bright increment and then losing that sort of that depth then. We're going to do exactly the same thing then with William by using the Stonewall Grey. So we're just going to pick out, as you can see, all of those colours just across the shirt, and I'm using the brush then to pick out all of those creases and create a little bit of character with those creases as well. Now from the Stonewall Grey, then Sky Grey becomes a really good natural and even sort of transition up to a lighter colour. Again, this is keeping with a nice neutral medium grey, but it's just that little bit lighter. And the cool thing with this is, again, because this is more of a medium sort of neutral grey, this is going to allow us to paint his underneath shirt a different colour to the lab coat, which will allow those colours to really stand off each other. We're then going to use the Sombre Grey again. Now, the Nuln has done a really great job on this because the Nuln now has darkened this one slightly but without going too extreme. So when we start painting this Sombre Grey back in, you'll see that this is already starting to really build that vibrancy. And again, I'm doing the exact same thing. So I'm painting, following the creases and following the lines and the folds of the cloth on those trousers. And then I'm going to sort of build that tone and that colour back up, as you can see. The cool thing is, using the brush strokes then, we're going to use some of the darkened colour underneath, and that's what's creating that depth of those creases and the depth of the folds in the clothes. So you've got that darker colour underneath because the shade and the wash is sat there, and as you slowly build this colour back up, and as you can see I'm using thin down paints, always recommend that you put a little bit of water with your paints, thin your paints down, because then they transition onto the miniature in a much smoother, more natural way. Now you can pop a little bit more grey into your Sombre Grey, maybe a little bit of cream if you wanted to boost the vibrancy a little bit more, but I'm just sticking with it as it is. I'm really happy with how that looks. Instead then I'm going to move straight on and I'm going to use Bloody Red to do William's tie and also Sherry's headband. So this is the really nice vibrant red. Not only does it have a great name being called Bloody Red, but it's a really nice vibrant red as well. So this is what's going to allow those red tones and those red colours to really stand off those parts of the miniature. Now with the whites, what we're going to do is we're going to mix the Ghost Grey and we're going to add a half and half. So we're going to go with the Ghost Grey and the Dead White, and we're going to mix those in half and half. So this is just one blob of each, and again by using a nice thin down paint we're going to slowly build this vibrancy back up on the clothing. So we're going to do this onto the lab coats and also onto Sherry's top as well. And you'll see that this, although it's not directly super white or really bright white or anything like that, you'll see because of that Nuln Oil sitting in those creases, as we follow the creases we're starting to really build up the texture, the tone and the vibrancy of this lab coats to make them look more white and to make them look a lot more like lab coats. And especially with those greys and those tones that we've used on Annette and on William, this is really going to allow those white colours and these lighter greys to really pop. Annette especially, because we've painted the greys for her trousers and her top so dark on the inside that when we paint in these lighter greys on the outside for the lab coats, it's really going to stand off. It's really going to give a really amazing sort of contrast between those lights and darks. It's really going to bring that character to life. So again, as you can see, I'm using the very tip of my brush just to paint this across the raised areas, and you can see that I'm doing that following the fluid motion of the cloak, of the clothing, sorry. So you can see that I'm following, with William the brush strokes are up and down because his lab coat is just falling downwards. Whereas with Annette then we're going across the miniature because the cloak and the lab coat is sort of moving around in a fluid fashion because she's got a lot more motion in her dynamic pose then. Now if you wanted to, you could build that up further by just using white, so just using the dead white and boosting that vibrancy on the whites a little bit more. That is completely up to you. Like I said, if you've seen me paint white before, that's how I paint. We go for the dead white, then we tone it down, then back to the dead white, then half and half, and then up to white. But I'm just making this nice and simple for this one because I don't feel like we need to go too extreme in this one. I'm painting these, they are already going to really stand out. Now for the hair then, I'm going to use a light earth, which is an AK interactive paint, and this now is a nice light sort of subtle tone. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the very tip of the brush, and we're going to try our best to pick out some of those strands. So we're going to pick out the strands of hair individually, and this is what's going to allow the hair to really pop on the miniature. This is the area of the miniature where you're going to look at and go, wow, there's some really fine details on that. Really spend some time painting all of those different hair strands, and also it's going to allow those miniatures to really look the part as well. Now once we've used the light earth, we're then going to use a vampiric flesh, which is the most natural sort of step up to that light earth that I can find in the paints. I'm going to do the same thing again, but this time what I'm going to do, especially with Annette, because her hair cascades down to around her sort of chin area, I'm just going to use the vampiric flesh just across the top. So I'm going to paint this across the top part of the hair, allowing the hair to have a highlighting across the top, whereas then across the bottom parts and the strands across the bottom, they will be a little bit darker, and that's going to give a really nice contrast between the light and dark areas of the hair. From there then, if you've seen me paint leathers before, you'll know how I do this. And we're going to use a leather brown from AK Interactive just to pick out the shoes. So we're just going to use, again, the very tip of the brush, and with this I'm going to use a little bit of a sort of stippling motion and things like that, just using, dabbing the very tip of the brush. And the reason for that is because with leathers and things, they kind of have scuffs and little sort of, not kind of patterns, but you know, sort of realistic kind of looks to them. You don't want everything to look really sort of smooth and brilliant when you're painting leathers. It's always good to sort of dab your brush and get a few of those sort of brush strokes and things to create an element of scratches and scuffs and marks and things like that. So that's what we're going to do here. From there then, we're going to use the leather brown and the deep brown, again using just one blob of each, so one part of each, and we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to use the very tip of the brush, and we're just going to dab it in different areas, just kind of create a little bit of depth and a little bit of a brighter patch and a little bit of a lighter look to those leather shoes, so that allows them to stand out a bit. Now, as you can see, like I was saying about the whites, you can see sort of on the whites of Sherry's shirt here, and of course the cloaks, the lab coats, I keep saying cloaks, sorry, the lab coats, we didn't really need to go too extreme or too far. They already really look the part. Now for William, I'm just going to use a small bit of peanut butter, which is again one of my favourite colours purely because of the name, and we're just going to pick out a little bit of the lightness on his shoes. From there then, we're going to use gunmetal, and with gunmetal we're going to take a very fine dry brush. We're going to take a little bit of the paint and we're going to rub it on a little bit of kitchen roll, and we're just going to make sure that there's hardly any paint on the brush at all, and then we're just going to dry brush slightly across the top of the pistol, just so that it looks like the pistol has been worn, it's been used, and some of the paint is sort of chipping off the weapon. Now for the base, this is the moment I know you've all been waiting for. We're going to paint the base to look like a really cool looking lab style. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a Riley Grey. This one is from scale 75. If you don't have scale 75 paints or anything like that, that's absolutely fine. You can use sort of any kind of dark grey for this. I would probably use the German grey from the the Vallejo, so the German grey would do a really good job as well. The reason why I'm using the Riley grey is because this does have a subtle hint of blue to it, which makes it a really nice colour. Now if you, from there then we're going to move on to using another scale 75 colour. We're just going to use a Miskatonic grey, and we're going to start to build this colour up, and what we're going to do is we're going to build the sort of almost like panels, I guess. So what I'm going to do is, as you can see, I'm just using thin down paints because this is going to take a few different coats, and I'm just planning where I want my sort of shape of this base to be. So we're going to kind of paint a square into the circle, but what we're doing is where we're painting the square into the circle, we're also painting just down the side, so this gives us a little sort of almost like a pen line square sort of base across this sort of round base. and take your time with it. You know, if you go over it, doesn't matter, because you can go back to the original colour and just use a fine brush to pick out those lines. And once we've gone through a few different coats, that's what it should look like. Then we're going to use Avalanche Sunset. Again, one of my favourite colours. This yellow from Citadel is fantastic. The coverage is fantastic. The vibrancy is fantastic. It's just a brilliant colour. And that's all we're going to do using the tip of the brush. We're just going to freehand a few sort of diagonal lines. And this is going to create that sort of yellow warning sign kind of effect that we're looking for. And again, it doesn't matter if you make mistakes, because you can go back to the colour that you used previously and paint this back up. So it's not the end of the world if you do make a mistake, but as you can see, it's just all about freehand. It's just about trying to paint them at an angle. So the grey that I used, the light grey on top of the Riley grey, again, if you don't use Scale 75 and you've used the German grey as the base tone, the next colour to paint up then is just a Stonewall grey on the base. See? So the Vallejo colours, if you use Vallejo and you'll be following the channel, you can use the German grey, then the Stonewall grey, and it will do the same thing as that Riley grey Miskatonic grey, see? So it's just about trying to figure out which colours and which paints you like to use the most. Don't worry if you don't have certain paints, there's always plenty of paints out there that you can use that will do a similar sort of job. Now what I'm also doing with the yellow is I'm painting sort of a freehand box here, and the reason why I'm painting this freehand box here is we're going to put a little sign in there. So for William's character on his base, I've written a little bit of a caution across the bottom, because not only does it tie into the lab base, but it also gives a little bit of foreshadowing as to what will happen to William later on, and what happens to him through the story as well. So from there, I'm also going to use a very light grey, as you can see, just to start to pick out some of the lines across the base here as well. So we're just going to go across this area, and again using a nice thin down paint. Doesn't matter again if you make mistakes, because you can always fix these things and pick these things back up. It's not a problem. So as I said, we're going with the German grey then, and we're going to start to write a small little sign. We're going to put a little caution on here as a foreshadowing for what will happen to William. If you've played the games, you'll know. If you haven't played the games, then play the games. Plain and simple, they're great games. So we're just going to single-handedly then just try to write, you know, by a little bit of freehand. Again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be uniformed or anything like that. We are painting this by hand. So there's going to be a little bit of an element of mistakes, or a little bit of an element of a character to it, because obviously everyone writes different and things like that. But that's what makes it so unique, because when you look at the bases, then you can see that it's been freehand and it's been well worked, and it looks great. It does look great. From there, I'm also then going to paint around the base in black. You can paint any colour you like. I know people like to paint around the bases in different colours. Personally, I prefer black, and especially with something like a lab base, I think it looks great in black, because it adds and ties into that sort of industrial sort of thing. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of blood for the blood god. As you can see, I'm showing you my brush here because I'm using a battered old worn brush, one of the ones that all of the bristles have sort of broken apart and sort of separated. And then I'm just going to use that brush, as you can see, just to kind of dab a little bit first. Now I'm going to use a couple of layers of this. So I'm going to dab it first here, and then we're just going to drag it across so that it looks like a smear. So almost like there's been a really sort of bad accident or a bad sort of blood smear from a zombie or something like that. And we're just going to drag it across and give ourselves an idea as to where this colour is going to go. Now the cool thing with this is, with that light grey colour that we're painting for this to be a bit of an industrial base, this red then really pops off the base, which really makes it stand out, and it adds to that sort of character to the base. And there you go, look at that, look at how cool that looks, that smear, that drag mark, it looks great. So yeah, that is how I painted the bases on the miniature. So I decided to do the base on a separate bit so that it was easier for you guys to see rather than paint it onto the models themselves. But it is as simple as that, and it's really, really fun to do. It looks great on anything that you do it industrial wise, or even something like your Resident Evil things where you've got the labs and things like that. And all in all, there are the three of our Birkins, all painted all together, and they look great. We could probably push them a little bit further, push the vibrance on the whites, but I'm not too worried. They look great as they are, and you can see those bases really do stand out. They make them look awesome. So yeah, it's been a really fun little painting project, trying to paint the three of them together. You'll have to let me know in the comments what you think of the bases and what you think of sort of the overall paint job of the three, and which one of the three is your favourite. Do you have a favourite? Which colours do you think match better? You know, and was it a simple and easy sort of tutorial to follow along? As always, my friends, I thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your time, your support, your comments, everything. You guys have been awesome. I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.